My name is Adam Scott Neal. I'm a composer, teacher, and writer, and I've been fascinated by musical instruments my whole life. Each instrument has personality and colors that create vivid aural images and moods. On this podcast, I talk to people who play, study, and compose for these instruments to uncover their meanings and hear pieces that best show off their personalities. Join me as we open Instrument Cases. Today's episode is about the bassoon. This is a woodwind instrument, meaning that the sound is initiated by air blowing across a small wooden reed. The bassoon is also made of wood, and it's usually about 4.5 feet long. The air tube itself actually goes down and then back up, so if it was stretched out, it would be more like 8 feet long. Opening and closing different holes along the tube effectively changes its length, and that alters the pitch. The lowest note on a bassoon is a B-flat 1. The highest note depends on the player, but pros can generally reach D5 or higher. A couple things to note before we begin the discussion. There are two main designs of the bassoon, French and German, with different placements of keys. The instrument has existed in some form since the 1600s. To learn more about the bassoon, I talked to a few bassoonists. I talked to Brittany Harrington-Smith, a bassoonist in Seattle and a member of the Breaking Winds Quartet. I talked to Peter Van Zandt Lane, a professor of composition at the University of Georgia, and Jolene Masone, a freelance bassoonist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One of my first questions was to just give me 3 words that encapsulate the personality and color of the bassoon.
I don't know, mellow, but goofy, but also like plaintive.
Woody, lyrical, and dynamic.
I would say it has a really, it's gonna sound corny, kind of an old soul. It's a very old instrument and it's just got a lot of depth. There are a lot of colors you can pull out of it. I would say that. And I would also say maybe unexpected because we can pull out that sort of like bumpy, fun, cartoonish, and then be like really serious and heart-wrenching, you know?
So now, of course, we need to know, what are some characteristic pieces? Where have we heard the bassoon before?
I think the ones people would know and are like pretty idiomatic would be like Sorcerer's Apprentice, Peter and the Wolf, the Grandfather. Both of those are kind of like, bouncy fun. I personally think that Shostakovich, hear me out, writes fantastically for the bassoon. Like, I think it's such great writing. Shostakovich 9, we get our own movement.
Shostakovich 9, I think, is the best orchestral excerpt for bassoon of all time. And it's because, like, I think it's like movement 3 or movement 4, where we start the piece with this like very like loud ba 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 dee da 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 da. You can make it sound one of 2 ways. You can make it sound very like forceful and triumphant, or you can make it sound like somebody is just like crying out, trying to cut through the noise, right? Because there's this brass behind it and all this craziness. And the Rite of Spring is like super famous for that bassoon solo at the very beginning.
The Rite of Spring opening is not idiomatic. It's not idiomatic on a French bassoon, let alone a German bassoon. And yet every single bassoonist playing past a intermediate or advanced high school level has to grapple with the opening of the Rite of Spring. And I think a lot of people think, oh, well, it's because it's so high that it's difficult. It's not that it's so high. It's actually not really reaching all the way up to the highest register of the German bassoon. It's just that the fingerings are so awkward, especially, when the theme shifts to semitone after the beginning of the opening. It's like the most difficult part of it, even though it's like the first few measures are the most iconic.
While earlier we touched on the most iconic passages for bassoon, I wanted to ask them, as players, what do they like playing? And what do they really not like playing?
My favorite things, my favorite solos are what I call the pokey ones. So kind of like Sorcerer's Apprentice or um Berlioz or any of those where they're just kind of pop 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 pop, pop. Those are like really fun for me. I find them especially satisfying. So maybe more like classical romantic versus like maybe like 20th century. But I also do love like Tchaikovsky always gives us like nice, beautiful solos that are like super satisfying to play because they always like end in this like beautiful, like you just kind of drift off into the orchestra and the orchestra comes out of, and those are always really lovely to play.
A lot of time I'm stuck playing that dirt, 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 like the bouncy thing and not getting into that what we call the money register, where it's that like very lyrical, um, beautiful quality. And uh, it doesn't have to be classical music, like what is it, Born Identity or Born Supremacy. You start it, it's bassoon solo, like in that high, beautiful range.
I always resented being the clown a little bit. Like, when you get cast as like the clown in a band piece or something like that, when you have to do the short like bum 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 bum, or like when there's like a musical joke, you know, the orchestral moment of flatulence and they give it to the bassoon. It's like, come on, use the trombone for that. Don't give that to the bassoon. I always really liked the lyrical music. There was a piece in like middle school band that I loved called Rosa Medre, and I can't remember the name of the composer, but it's like the bassoon has the main line, and it's really lyrical. And I was like, oh, this can be my part, because you get so used to just dropping ones and threes with the horn giving you twos and fours, um, and so I always enjoyed. I really gravitated towards like lyrical playing, but then also I think just got into really like rhythmic and technical stuff and upper register. So I felt like that was always my strong points as a player, was like, let me cram in as many notes as I can.
Since this instrument is a bit more esoteric than some others, I had to ask my friends, how did you get started playing bassoon in the first place? They had similar answers.
I started playing bassoon when I was about 14, which is kind of a run of the mill age for most bassoonists to start. Usually they don't start in like sixth grade with everybody else. Usually they get thrown on there in high school after playing another instrument for a couple years. And then the band director's like, hey, you should play this instrument.
I guess I started in sixth grade. I showed up to middle school band. I was very excited to get started, and I asked to play the saxophone, and they gave me a bassoon, and that's where it started. So
So I started playing in sixth grade. I was 11. I will say bassoon was not my first selection. I was kind of voluntold that I had to do it, a little bit kicking and screaming, and here we are though.
My story was that like I was the top flute player. I beat like everybody else, but he wouldn't let me in the top band because his three top flute players were all seniors and he didn't want to offend them. So he wouldn't let me like chair challenge them. But I was like, well, then how can I be in the top band? And he was like, I know. You can play this instrument.
The bassoon is undoubtedly unique, but not as popular as the cello or guitar. It seems like a certain personality is attracted to playing bassoon, or at least a certain personality has the wherewithal to continue playing the bassoon. So I asked my friends to tell me more about those personalities and more about the challenges that come along with playing the bassoon.
I mean, I think all musicians have to be a little bit of like, the puzzlers, but I think bassoon attracts a special kind of like, we're not quite as neurotic as oboists, but like we definitely have our moments of like, why isn't this reed working? And like, because I mean, not only do you have like all of the like weird stuff with the thumbs and the pinkies and all of the holes and everything like that, but also you have just making reeds and figuring out, how to do that. And that's a whole other thing on top of playing the bassoon.
There is a pretty diverse personality pool for bassoon. I think it's an instrument that is not very stereotyped in the way of like you have all sorts of people playing it. I would say quirky. So I think the type of people that like it, they're drawn to the sound. I've heard a lot of people say that they're drawn to the uniqueness of it. You're kind of quirky with none of these things. I was voluntold yet again to play bassoon. What I think makes bassoon challenging, like you said, you do have to make reads. And it's to me a longer process. You don't sit down in like 1 hour and end to end make a read. Like you have to have some patience about it and also strategy to be able to kind of like know, oh, I have these things coming up. This is sort of my timeline. The fingering system is absolutely insane. I wish I was in my studio. I have a book that's like what 2 inches. A lot of people know it in the bassoon world. Hugh Cooper book. Every page is a different fingering for bassoon. Every single page is a fingering. And there are a lot of unforgiving things about it. You have a lot of variables.
Like it's worth knowing that the bottom 2.5 octaves of the instrument are fairly intuitive in terms of fingerings, and then you still have another octave plus, but it becomes like every fingering becomes a sort of acrobatic shift. That the thumbs need to navigate too many keys, and the pinkies have to navigate too many keys, and that sometimes leaping from one note to another is an extremely awkward, quick change of hand positioning.
In addition to talking about personality types that gravitate toward the bassoon and the difficulties of it, we got into the timbre of the bassoon, the color of it, because the color is not the same throughout the whole range.
Obviously, the bassoon is kind of cut into like 3 octaves, right? And each one of them kind of has their place in the orchestra, but also kind of has their own timbral feel. The bottom register is a little more buzzy. It can be really dark if you make your read a certain way, but for the most part, it's going to be a little buzzier, a little bit more. Most people think of the bassoon kind of in that bottom and middle register. The bassoon is just kind of real low and kind of buzzy in that lower range. But when you get to the middle range, that's where you get all of the like some of the most characteristic orchestral excerpts.
With Peter, I talked a little more specifically about how people should compose for the bassoon, and he thought they should keep in mind
what's actually physically happening when you play an instrument, and having an understanding of instruments, like what physically goes into them, and the physics of how they work, so that you're like not pushing too hard against just like the laws of gravity, or physics, or air pressure, or the size of things, the size of materials vibrating, the size of the size of a cavity being activated by air. Like these have speed limits, so there's like physical idiomatic limitations and strengths and weaknesses of instruments.
The bassoon of Stravinsky's time is very close to the bassoon we have now. Obviously, most of us play German bassoons these days, and Stravinsky was writing for a French bassoon, which is a touch different in the way it's like constructed, mostly in its fingering mechanisms. But the bassoon itself, while machinery and things like that have made it easier to like, make the tuning easier and make the actual instrument last longer and things like that, the actual like construction of the bassoon hasn't really changed in the past basically 100 years.
When discussing bassoon repertoire, Jolene mentioned a few pieces that represented the bassoon very well but weren't as well known, and I asked her to give me a deep dive into those pieces.
So this is the Variations on an Air by Pergolesi, and it's by Ottmar Nussio. And Ottmar Nussio was Swiss but Italian. He ended up growing up in Italy, and he grew up like in the south of Switzerland, and so he's basically Italian. But it's probably one of the only like Italian 20th century pieces we have. He wrote a piece for bassoon, and it's Variations on an Air by Pergolesi. And I know there's like 3 dissertations about this piece out there somewhere, but the air is at the very beginning, and it's like 16, 18 measures long, something like that. And then the rest of the movement is just variations based on this theme. And the farther you get through the piece, the farther away we get from the actual like source material, right? Each movement kind of explores what the bassoon could do in that time period with like the farthest stretches that we knew of at the time, right? So there's a movement where they're doing lots of crazy jumps. There's a movement where they're doing these weird grace notes. There's a movement that's like super fast. But the first movement, the actual air, is quite like melancholy and slow and dark. The rest of it is just kind of bright and shiny and flashy and just very much like this very beautiful homage to the bassoon. I think in a way that there's no other piece really like it that captures the bassoon in the same way.
This piece by Nucio is from 1953, so it's definitely a modern piece. But for something more experimental and modern in that sense, we turn to a piece from 2010.
Pierluigi Bellone and his Blouse Fragment is very much in the vein of New Complexity. And so it's extreme virtuosity, basically. So there's like nested couplets and crazy rhythms and very little meter. There's lots of multiphonics. And things like that. Some of his pieces are kind of multiphonic heavy, but most of them are really just about like playing really difficult music. And Lorelei Dowling, the person who like premieres all of his pieces, she's an insane player. Like she's so good. I've played several pieces because of her, but Bellone kind of just captures pretty much like I said about the Nucio piece. It kind of captures everything weird that we can do now, right? So all the extended techniques are kind of in one place for you. It's a one-stop shop of sounds. So while the Otmar Nucio piece kind of covers everything classical, like anything sort of like I don't want to say middle of the road classical, but if you were going to write a classical concerto for bassoon tomorrow, you could look at the Otmar Nucio piece and be like, I want that sound and that sound and that sound. What did he do and how can I get it? The Bellone piece is very much like, okay, I want that sound and that sound and that sound. And what did he do to get it from Lorelei?
While thinking about the contemporary bassoon, I wanted to talk to Peter about his work as a composer. Since he performs the instrument himself, he's intimately aware of how it works. And during graduate school, he wrote a set of 4 pieces for solo bassoonist with live electronic processing.
The pieces I've written for bassoon and electronics, there's like a set of 4 pieces I wrote. That was written between the years of 2008 and 2014. And they've sort of gone off and had a life of their own. And actually just at the most recent International Double Reed Society conference, I think for the first time since 2014, since the last one was written, a bassoonist played all 4 of them at the conference as a set, which is like 25 minutes of bassoon and electronics music, which might be too much. They explore the upper register, they're technical and have a lot of runs, and it's just kind of an expression of my own sort of proclivities as a player, and also wanting to challenge myself. One of those pieces, Hydromancer, I wrote the bassoon part, most of the bassoon part on a long airplane ride. So I didn't have the instrument in my hands. I was just sort of going through the motions in my head and wrote all this stuff down by hand. I get down and I try to play it, and I'm like, oh, I've gone a little too far here. Fun to write for yourself and use that as an opportunity to challenge yourself a little bit. Yeah, also, the bassoon and electronics pieces were really a product of wanting to have a space to be able to write more and play more pieces for electronic sounds and instruments, which I had written a few pieces before I wrote my first bassoon and electronics piece. But once I did that, I realized there was a lot of opportunities to get out there and perform them on festivals and conferences, because you can be your own performer and therefore provide your own performer. And so I kind of kept coming back to that.
Let's hear some clips. What should we be listening for?
Electronic sounds, a lot of which are, coming from one particular like sound source, mixed with processed sounds from the bassoon, and that sort of setting the sort of sound world for each piece. The first one, Aeromancer, is sort of like some air sounds and processed sounds. The second one, Hydromancer, was like water droplets. The third one, Pyromancer, I actually set a microphone on fire and recorded the sounds that it made as it burned and incorporated that into the piece. And the last one, Chronomancer, just had some sounds of clocks, and all of these are mixed with what you're mostly hearing is like me recording myself on the bassoon, little phrases and notes and sounds here or there, even things like key clicks or little extended techniques, and then processing them and incorporating them into a series of audio files that can be basically triggered with your foot while you're performing as a backing track.
Now you've heard some pieces for bassoon, including some iconic moments from the orchestral literature, all the way to some contemporary pieces that use multiphonics and live electronics. I wanted to leave you with something decidedly more fun, which is the work of the Breaking Winds Quartet. I talked to one of the members, Brittany Harrington-Smith, about the history of the group and their ideas for bringing bassoon to different audiences.
Kind of the story that we always tell is, I think, is simplest to say, when you're in music school, you have a jury. And so if you don't know what a jury is, it's basically your final exam. And it's very stressful. You really want to do well. Everyone's practicing really hard. And when we were sophomores, for whatever reason, sophomore juries were in the winter, in the fall semester. So we were done. We did not have juries at the end of the year. And we were like, let's do something fun. Back then it was Kara, Lamore, Lauren Uziamba, myself, and another bassoonist named Darren Bauer. And there's this classic bassoon quartet called the Bubonic Bassoon Quartet. And they did goofy things, like funny, goofy music, not super shticky, but they have a song called Wedding Guest, and you sing, and it's very bassoon bar song. And in any case, we put this recital on, and we had brunch, and we put bubbles under people's seats to blow during Wedding Guest, and just made it really fun. And it was so lighthearted, and we just had a great time doing it. And not being super, pedantic and intellectual about every phrase. So from there, we're all right, let's do it again. And so we did another recital, and Kara was like, I'm going to arrange some Lady Gaga music. And we're like, all right, cool. And then we're like, maybe we should stand and play bassoon. And that just snowballed into this thing where we got in the costumes, and we had the wigs, and we did dance moves. And from there, it just kept going, and we did it this one recital right before we left Eastman, and like a ton of videos from it are on YouTube. And it was just like a 2.5 hour like insane fest of like the wildest stuff you have seen. Two people on one bassoon, one person's fingering the notes, the other one's blowing, and then we do like a dance break in the middle, like just whatever you can think of. We really want to do it.
That, of course, was an arrangement of the Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight, performed by the Breaking Winds Quartet. Now that we've explored the bassoon in a variety of contexts, I hope you have a greater sense for the beauty and the goofiness and the woodiness of this instrument, which has an old soul, but a rich and aching and lyrical soul. It can be fun and bouncy, it can be super expressive, and everything in between. So thank you to my guests, Jolene Masone, Peter Van Zandt Lane, Brittany Harrington-Smith. Thank you to Olivia Palmer-Baker for the blues fragment excerpt. And thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me next time when I open more instrument cases.